It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstye Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media business industrial complex and all of its global market power. Steve, how you doing today?
I am doing fine, man. It's winter down here. That kind of bums me out. But I did see another. It's like the weekly concert report on this show. I saw another one.
Oh yeah,
I saw Leonard Skinner at a private corporate gig.
Oh, that's right. I remember you said you were going to that. I don't know if you said that on the air. Or just
Yeah, man. Yeah. It ended up being 8th row center. They look old.
Yeah.
That's what. And I didn't pay anything for it because it was a corporate gig, but it's like I'm looking up there and not one of those guys. Gary Rosington wasn't there for whatever. I think he's like semi-retired now, and so there's not one member of Leonard Skinner that is an original member pre 1977 aircraft accident. Every single one.
There's some kids, right? There's some kids in there. Second generation.
Well, the singer is Johnny is the singer. That's Ronnie's brother. But the rest of them are just, and Ricky Medlock is one of the lead guitarists. He was a bass player for Skinner in the early 70s. So you could argue he's maybe a vested member, but the rest of them are just new players. A couple of them have been there for a long time, since the resurrection. But regardless, great show. Highly recommended. If you ever get a chance to get free tickets to the Skinner show, definitely pick it up. Bret Michaels was the opener, from Poison with his solo band. He was immensely entertaining, and his I guess only a guitar nerd like me would think this is funny, but the lead guitarist stepped on his guitar cable twice in the middle
and unplugged himself.
Yeah, right in the middle of Talk Dirty to Me. He did it twice, right in the middle of the solo. Boom, gone. Then he did it again in the chorus. And all of a sudden they were just hearing the bass, and he's sitting there frantically trying to find his cable. It was just funny.
Yeah, I can only imagine the dressing down that he got from Mr. Michaels after the show.
Oh, I know. Bret Michaels strikes me as a bit of a control freak, so yeah.
Yeah, but bread and butter here. You don't want to mess up your corporate gig slush fund.
Oh, I know. And even it's funny because Johnny Van Zant mentioned this, and not mentioned about the corporate gig. He's talked about how much they love corporate gigs. It didn't say why. It's all we love corporate gigs.
Yeah, more money, less of a set, and more in some ways
less hassle. They don't have to pay as much of the crew, and
yeah, totally, yeah. I have a mini insider look, and I can attest these bands that are big enough to get booked at corporate gigs love corporate gigs.
Yeah, it was fun. So I'll do whatever the next concert is. I will have a report.
When a quick story, when I was working I never lived there, but I worked in Silicon Valley adjacent, I'll call it. There was a big organizational all hands, and I was actually on my way home at the end of it, and I was missing the big week wrap party. And my phone blows up. All of my colleagues, Macklemore is a special guest. He was a white rapper, had that song about thrift shops or whatever. And everyone was like, I was like, that's so dumb. And I was like, that's Silicon Valley in a nutshell. So about a year and a half later, I sit down on my couch, very excited to watch HBO's new sitcom by Beavis and Butthead, Mike Judge and King of the Hill. Sit down to watch it. The very first scene is like 10 nerd engineers watching Kid Rock at some all company. I was like, oh my God, I was like, I already knew the show was going to be like a weird Funhouse mirror version of my real experiences in Silicon Valley. And then literally it could not have been more real right there.
See, I love Kid Rock. He's one of my favorite artists in the music scene of all time. Love Kid. I'm not
even commenting on Kid Rock. I just think it was hysterical that it was.
I know. And it kind of fits. It sort of also fits a bit with the Macklemore image.
Totally. Yeah. So I was like, wow. So yeah, corporate gigs. If you're lucky enough to attend, you should go, even as just an experience, regardless of who the act is.
Oh, it was because not everybody's a Skinner fan, but they're all going to go just because it's an event provided by their company, and so these people are there have no idea what Freebird is at all, and then there's like the fanatics. I'm probably bordering on a Skinner fanatic, and so that group is all excited, but then there's people like sitting down, in like the 12th row,
Yeah. Well, they've been fattened up with free food and booze for probably the previous 90 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That was
you
the
mentioned
first one they've ever done. That was fun.
It's like take your cliches about the office Christmas party and add a rock concert.
Oh, that is exactly what it was. Yeah, that's perfect.
Anyway, well, here's the transition, Steve. We can pretty much guess that Snyder's various companies, including the Washington Commanders, have never had such fun corporate parties, or maybe they had too much fun at corporate parties. But we are talking about Snyder again.
One thing I can guarantee you, without a shadow of a doubt, is that Dan Snyder is way too cheap to put on an event like that.
Yeah.
And this company had done 3 of them, one in Dallas and one in Miami, or not Miami, somewhere, North Carolina, with Dierks Bentley, who's also expensive. So Dan Snyder, I would bet my life, has never, ever hired anybody like that to benefit his employees and their customers.
Yeah, maybe a clown making balloon animals or something.
Either that or he's brought in a bunch of hookers.
Right. Yeah. Right. The difference that goes on in the general party and in the owner's suite for sure. Maybe that's the difference.
Yeah.
Well, we got a lot. No big toppling, no big news like we talked about a couple weeks ago, but definitely the continued drumbeat of stories and actually some pretty substantial updates. Although we don't want to get lost in the morass.
Yeah, so what's happened this past week is that Carl Racine, who's the Attorney General of the District of Columbia, has filed a consumer protection lawsuit against the team and the NFL and Dan Snyder individually and Roger Goodell individually, because of course he has. So I'm not a consumer attorney, but I can pretend to be one for the purposes of this show. The District of Columbia has a fairly strong consumer protection statute. Some states do, some states don't. Texas, my home state, has a very strong one, for example. But so they filed this lawsuit, and in the essence of the lawsuit, it's really long. It's 45 pages long. It goes through all the history of all these stories, of all these horrible things that the team has done, and there's a sprinkle of the NFL in there to make it work for defendants wise. The fundamental claims here, there's 2 causes of action. One is that the defendants made misleading statements and failed to disclose material information related to the Wilkinson investigation in violation of the Consumer Protection Procedures Act. That's count 1. Count 2 is Snyder and the team misled the public as to their knowledge of and Snyder's participation in creating the team's toxic and hostile work environment in violation of the Consumer Protection Procedures Act. Now, how is that a consumer protection problem, you ask? Well, that's a good question. I think it's tenuous, but the argument here is that those violations, which essentially amount to you guys lied to the public, prevented the public from having full information when they decided whether or not to support the team by purchasing tickets and merchandise. Now, that's kind of one step removed from a real traditional consumer protection claim. Traditional consumer protection claim would be the team is marketing jerseys as being game worn and they're not. That's a consumer protection claim. This one is sort of a tenuous kind of once removed thing, so I don't know how strong it is.
And the second one, they announced, didn't Racine, DC AG, outgoing DC AG, I think is important to note, is they also filed a second one this week that is a more traditional consumer protection one on the unreturned deposits. So
okay, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, they announced that this past week. I think Thursday of this past week. Now there was no press conference. There was no big dog and pony show. But they did open that second one up. And
I don't know why they wouldn't have included that in this original lawsuit as a third count.
Right, just bundle it all.
Yeah,
because it's that's an obvious consumer protection issue, right? Like, hey, this company, which is quite frankly, not, and I'm not defending this and defending anyone that does this, but it's fairly standard practice to make getting your deposit back a pain in the ass, which is essentially what most people that take deposits
and that is
do.
that is a real consumer
Right. That's what I'm saying.
protection
That's a legitimate. So that there's two lawsuits now going, and we have the other information that just in the last like 24 hours, I think 48 hours, depending on when we're recording, when you're listening, is that the university, the state of Maryland has actually settled the similar lawsuit on that front. So with Snyder. With the Commanders, so there's probably a there. It's small potatoes, but it really makes me. I mean, you have to really question Racine's motives on a number of fronts.
There is no question about his motives. This is a political stunt to get, a publicity stunt rather, not political. It's a publicity.
Yeah, it's more publicity because I think he's like, okay, I need to make a name for myself. How, in this area, and then considering this area's, the DC area's influence on the rest of the country, how can I get a name quickly as I transition into private sector work, whether that's consulting, new clients, or TV speaking gigs?
Or running for mayor.
Right, or the next political move. Right. So it's, there's fewer public winners than taking a chunk of Dan Snyder.
Yeah. And by the way, the damages in this petition were totally undefined. I mean, that's not that unusual. So some petitions in the first draft, the first filing rather, don't have damages really defined. But in this case, it was very, very basic. It just said injunctive relief and equitable relief and monetary damages, and that was kind of it. And the reason is, number one, there's no argument for injunctive relief. For those of you who don't know what injunctive relief is, that is an order from a court. There's three types. There's a temporary restraining order, there's a temporary injunction, and a permanent injunction. And the essence of the argument for those is that there's irreparable harm that will occur if the court does not issue this order. Here, there's no irreparable harm. It's just money, and money is not irreparable harm in almost any court. And they didn't make a specific you have to make a specific pleading for this. A form of restraining order needs to be attached to the petition with an argument. None of that's made. So that's just babble. The damages part is more fascinating to me. Economic damages, because how are you going to determine damages in this lawsuit?
You can't.
I mean, you're going to have to figure out how many district consumers bought merchandise and tickets. You could do the tickets probably fairly easily, but merchandise, that's tough. And then how many of them are actually affected by the alleged violations, and where are you going to get the information? It's just almost impossible to think.
Doesn't it also? Now I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on a podcast. So, isn't it also set up a pretty weird and dangerous precedent potentially, or just not precedent might be a strong word, but where the kind of indemnity or culpability or whatever legalese word for like being a second or tertiary involvement in somebody else's malfeasance, right? Like it's sort of like, like how far can you, like, oh, they had a bad culture over here, at
what I'm talking about.
Supermarket ownership. So, I'm going to sue Pepsi because it's sold there.
Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That is the problem with this case. It's, they're basically saying the team are a bunch of slime balls. They lied about being slime balls, and so it's a consumer protection problem because the people should have known you're a slime ball. Well, there's a lot of slime balls out there, and that's not even the point. The point is, are they honestly advertising and marketing their product? That's the point. And nobody's ever alleged that they're doing slimy things with their merchandise. And the ticket thing is another matter. I wasn't even aware they were filing or have already filed this deposit law. That's clear. If the terms of service required a refund of the deposit and they didn't do it, that's tangible, for lack of a better term. And whereas this one, I'm telling you guys, this is just a publicity stunt, particularly involving the NFL and Roger Goodell in this. This is a way to get discovery. I'll tell you what, if the DC prosecutors really wanted to stir up trouble, what I would do is I would send out a Mount Everest of requests for production. Try to get all of the records, all of the NFL's financial records, make them all public, make the NFL have to go get a confidentiality order from the judge. That would be fascinating just to see. That's what, if you really want to stir up trouble, that's what I would do. But I think this lawsuit is going to go away quietly if Dan Snyder sells.
I think it might go away just with the transfer of power to a new AG.
It may, that too. It could happen.
And I think what ultimately happened was this one will it will go, it'll just go away quietly for whoever takes it out the door, and we'll see a settlement on the seat deposits similar to Maryland.
That's exactly right.
In fact, there's probably the one in place, or wouldn't be that hard. They're probably already talking about that, and they'll just model it off the Maryland one anyway. So that'll get settled. And the other one will go away. I do think the NFL being named is interesting. Interesting, maybe not important, as Ron Rivera would say, but because it just continues to get blood splatter on the NFL. And I think what it really does to me illustrate, and this is directly in this lawsuit, valid or not, is how badly Goodell, and Goodell is as representative of the owners, bungled the Beth Wilkinson investigation, because everything, and this isn't the only legal risk the league has from that, Gruden, et cetera, et cetera. So just how badly they decided, the no report, the basically not listening to her probable recommendations, the slap on the wrist, then going and loaning him some, the money and doing all that stuff with the minority owners 6 months, a year later. Those bad decisions just have had to revert, they just don't go away for Goodell. You really wonder, if they would do it differently. I mean, I think guaranteed they do it differently, but they really lost the golden chance, and not taking the golden chance has just continued the line of sewage.
Well, what does Dan Snyder have on Roger Goodell that Goodell keeps throwing him favor? I mean, is there a picture? Are there nude pictures of Goodell with the secretary or something? I mean,
the release the emails.
yeah, I guess. What was really bungled about the Wilkinson investigation was not having a written report. And the argument, if everybody recalls, was that they were concerned about the confidentiality of the witnesses. Have you ever heard of a permanent marker?
No, that's the easiest thing to solve.
Oh, I know. You just redact the names, and locations. That is not an argument for anybody.
Bust out the Sharpie.
Yeah, right. Exactly right. Where's you have a permanent marker? I'll go buy you a pack. You can get them from the Office Max. That's absurd. And I mean, just not producing a report, it's just mind-boggling that you would spend that much money and then you have to catch Roger Goodell at Starbucks over a cup of coffee, and explain to him what happened. And I would be mad if I was an owner. I'd be really furious. You just flushed that money down the toilet and got no result whatsoever.
Now, here's an interesting because we don't want to be, wall-to-wall Snyder. And there's a last, and let's keep our eyes on the prize, which is him no longer being an owner. So, and there's an interesting way to crosswalk this is in that deal for the loan, the getting out of the minority owners, all that stuff that happened, increasing his debt limit. We've talked about this ad nauseum. Was actually just like a good player contract, there's a bit of a poison pill in that loan, in that if he doesn't have, by I think 2028, 2029, if he can't pay it back, he's got to sell the team. I'm not getting the language exactly right, but there's this is sort of new information, a really interesting poison pill, which we combine it with the fact that to get to that point, to pay them back and to be on his feet, he needs a new stadium built or on the way to being built, and a done deal financially. And we kind of know that's not going to happen. And we kind of know now that there is a kind of like that poison pill endgame from the league. And I think that squeeze play is actually what's got him in this sell position.
Well, I didn't know about the poison pill part, but I did know about the debt service on $800 million. And that's why I thought in the beginning that Snyder's hiring of Bank of America was probably him just trying to get a minority shareholder in there because he's got to pay the debt service. He's got to pay the debt service, and he doesn't have it. He doesn't have a bunch of other businesses, income and stuff. And, you're compromising the income from the team that much. And let me tell you, debt service on $800 million, that for even a 30-year term is, you're talking tens of millions of dollars a year. So it's not a small amount of money. So, yeah, certainly the poison pill part, and we don't really know how it works because we haven't seen the contractual documents. But the net nutshell of it was he's got to sell if he can't pay it back. That was kind of the nutshell of it. And that I think that part of it definitely factors into the calculus of whether or not he's going to sell.
Now, if him selling is the ultimate goal, I don't think it's been a very good week. So I think the fundamentals would sort of still, what we just talked about, are still pushing it that way. But Ben Fisher in the Sports Business Journal, which is there a better, and it's pretty much the go-to outlet for this stuff. You can trust it on all levels. They had a little news blurb. It was mostly about Bezos. Is he chilling effect? Yada, yada. That's interesting. But this was actually the buried lead. And I'll just read right from the article, quick paragraph. Another thing is keeping much of the billionaire class from investing too much time or emotional energy in Snyder's true intentions remain a mystery. Quote, many of the bidders, including those on the Broncos, are holding back for now, one insider said. Bank of America, here's the money quote. Bank of America's initial remit is to find a new limited partner, but that could easily change, and insiders agree that a full ownership is still on the table. So right there, they said that, like, now we might be in a different place now, but that the initial motivation was a financing plan by doing the only thing he has to sell, which is partial ownership in the team. And
two guys with a sports business podcast said that in the beginning. If you recall. I mean, I know what the fans immediately jumped to, but it was kind of obvious that was certainly on the table, and now it's not. Yeah, I mean, the bit about Bezos, I think all Chris is talking about is they're basically saying Bezos, who's the 1,000-pound gorilla in the billionaire world, or one of two, maybe three if you want to throw the Facebook guy in there too. If he's on the table, everybody just knows he can outbid him, and that's the end of it. And so why bother? That's kind of what the implication is.
And in the Broncos sale, the Walton family was sort of Bezos of that negotiation and had a chilling effect, and actually got them a bargain. Most people now say that the reason it didn't go above $5 billion, which a lot of people had said it's going to be right around, and it was right around it, but people thought on the north side of it. I think. Yeah, people had predicted the north side of it was because the Walton money was just such sharp elbows that it actually had a chilling effect on bidding. Because why bother? And then Walton's got a discount.
Yeah, which is what could happen here. Because I think $7 billion is too much. I really do. I know that number's been thrown around. You threw that number around. The more I think about it, the more I think it's going to be 6 or maybe even less than 6.
We'll see. I think that's happening. So it's not been a good week if you want the sell, but I think the fundamentals towards him selling the full thing are still probably pretty strong.
Probably so. Yeah.
All right. So let's go from Bezos to beer. The World Cup is about to
by the time you listen to this, it will have started. So
now you're not going to get a lot of World Cup coverage on this show, except for this kind of angle, because we're not big soccer guys. But at the same time, this is a huge story. So we talked about this, 2 months ago, maybe something around that, when they finally got a deal to sell beer in the stadium. And of course, we talked about how it's all Budweiser and it's all, all wrapped up in a bow. Well, just days out, in fact, as planes are hitting the tarmac, beer sales are now banned in the stadium. I think this is just kind of a wild development, and it is sparking all kinds of conversations on the business side, on the how can you stage huge events in places that are so restrictive, about FIFA's ultimate power to control their own event, and then it's got implications like how angry is Budweiser, et cetera, et cetera. Steve?
Well, I really wonder, did FIFA not have contractual documents in place with the local government of Qatar, that defined this already? I mean,
not strong ones.
No, either that or the government just ripped them up and threw them in the trash can, because it's legal malpractice to not have the sponsors approved by the controlling entity that owns the stadium. I don't understand how that could happen, and perhaps this is just Middle East politics, and the ruling family there just decided, and that's the end of it. I could not read the story that you sent, Chris, because in New York I was locked out of New York Times. But another one that I wrote said that Budweiser tweeted out, "Well, that's awkward," and then deleted it shortly thereafter. So what the compromise here is, apparently they are allowing Budweiser Zero, which I've never heard of before this week, but
Near
apparently
beer.
it is a non-alcoholic beer to be sold. But if I were FIFA, I would really be mad at my lawyers, whoever they are. Um, and again, I mean, maybe Qatar just doesn't care whatever they signed, but my goodness, this is, by the way, why I'm talking to you, Olympic Committee, and you, FIFA.
And you
Don't.
NFL.
Yeah,
'Cause they're
well, the
thinking,
NFL hasn't made this mistake yet. Don't put these world international events in weird places. Okay, stick to major cities, major countries, first world countries that aren't totalitarian dictatorships, preferably, that can do that. There are lots of cities that can do this. You don't have to go to the Middle East to put on a World Cup. And by the way, we did a story, 2 years ago, about the labor. Remember this? About the labor that went into building this soccer stadium?
there are 1,000 missing migrant workers right now
That are buried in concrete
yeah,
underneath the stadium.
yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about this a couple years ago, but that is the way. If people don't know this, the way labor works in the Middle East is gnat hair from indentured servitude. They will go recruit people from India, especially, and they lie to them and bring them into the Middle East, and then say, "Well, now you got to work for us for almost free for 10 years before we'll let you go because of the amount of money we pay to get you here." And that is indentured servitude, and that's unconstitutional in the United States, and in any reasonable country. That is, you don't need to have these events in places like this. Paris, Frankfurt, Rio. There's a million cities that could do this without having human rights problems and things like a sponsorship worth $110 million or whatever. I think it was $110 million put in jeopardy 2 days before the event. I just think it's inexcusable on FIFA's part. They should have known this is coming.
Well, it just in the New York Times article does a good job of articulating this. What it really shows is that FIFA has lost control of this event,
Right.
And which is kind of hand in glove to
I'd
your
argue
point.
they never had it.
When you pet the rattlesnake, you get bit, right? So you don't have petting zoos for king cobras, right? So so that's the problem, and so FIFA thought they could, right? And there's lots of reasons to have it here. They are huge cities. They do have huge infrastructure, and they have an insane amount of money. But that's where it ends, right? And this is so if you get pulled into that and think we can manage it, right? It's like, oh, I can control this, or we're strong enough to control this, or our the World Cup as a brand and as an event is strong enough to control this. Well, you can't, and that's what this is showing, and this is showing that FIFA really, to your point earlier, where basically a ruler can just rip things up and throw it in the trash can, and by the way, have religion as a justification. That's a pretty heady 1-2 combo. Then it shows that they're not running this event. The country of the ruling class of Qatar are controlling this event, not FIFA. All that stuff, and so that we're talking about beer, and it's a kind of a pop culture story to a little bit. People can understand beer sales. It makes all the complexities a little bit more digestible. But yeah, you can extend this to labor rights. You can extend this all kinds of ways in which you'd figure out how to do these things well. And something legal, not have slavery essentially, and so the beer just sort of is the story here about a much larger issues, and FIFA obviously is not in control of this World Cup, and who knows what's going to happen. The rest for the event hasn't started.
Yeah. Now, why didn't FIFA understand this ahead of time? Anybody who spent 5 minutes in the Middle East could have seen this coming. Anybody who knows anything about the culture in the Middle East knows that the ruling family in these places can just decide stuff without any rational thought whatsoever, no explanation, no anything, just because. And they do it. And I don't know why FIFA didn't fully understand that that was going to happen, and why they didn't put their foot down about the labor on the stadium.
Right.
You know,
yeah, if you can't hold the line on, basic slavery issues, then,
yeah.
how are you going to control, beer?
Because remember that the people that ran FIFA got charged in a bunch of different international courts for corruption a few years ago.
FIFA's, yeah.
They're horrible. They're horrible. So I mean, you guys think there's monkey business going into things like, the NFL putting Super Bowls in cities. It's nothing. That's nothing compared to what goes on in FIFA. So you throw in the most corrupt sports organization in the world into the Middle East, and nothing good comes of that. Yeah, absolutely not. And I've heard my well, I won't say who, but somebody came to me and said, "Hey, did you see the stories about where they're housing the athletes in Qatar?" Which I hadn't seen, and I still haven't seen. He didn't cite a source for me, but apparently there are tents, which just blew my mind. None. FIFA has only themselves to blame.
And that's what I was sort of saying, like, we haven't even kicked off the event. You're going to have athletes talking. You're going to have fans that traveled there talking. You're going to have some incidents. They may not be like, that have to be dealt with. We don't even have the whole long tail of issues that happen. This is all lead up to the event, let alone staging the event.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten to the event yet.
Yeah.
Remember that. I have no sympathy whatsoever for a combination of FIFA and a Middle Eastern government negotiating with themselves. I have no sympathy at all for that. So here's the question though. What does Budweiser do? So is Budweiser going to be mad enough where they sue FIFA?
No, I think they'll just get, this probably isn't the right parlance, but they'll get buybacks similar to when, buy ads on a show or football game. It doesn't do as well, right? I think they'll just lower the cost of future things. There'll be some renegotiations. They'll get some sweetheart deals as part of their ongoing. This relationship is 1986, I believe. So this is not a new relationship between FIFA and Budweiser. So there'll be ruffled feathers, and they will definitely be in a better bargaining position. But I think they'll just extract their revenge that way.
Yeah, I think you're probably. I mean, that's a smart way to go. Of course, we're talking about FIFA here, so. I mean, there's no telling, really, but I think that's probably most likely. I'm going to put the irony aside of having beer being the sponsor of an event of athleticism, but be that as it may, it has been a long time partnership, and there's ample ways to make goods on the next. Give them a better deal on the next, World Cup, for example. Or a myriad of other events.
An interesting way to see how FIFA lost the control here is in the Brazil hosted World Cup, which I think is like one or two World Cups ago. I don't know. Maybe it was the last one. Who knows? They actually in Brazil had banned beer in stadiums just basically for public safety reasons, right? Which, the same reason why you can't buy a beer in the fourth quarter at a lot of football games and stuff like that, right? Because, too much beer, rowdy people, it doesn't always a great combo. So they had banned beer in stadiums just for that, public safety. FIFA strong-armed them into changing those rules for their World Cup. So, we have a very recent example of FIFA going, no, you must sell our partner Budweiser beer in your stadium or we're not doing your event. So we even see what it's like when they actually do have a better control of the event.
But I think you made a key point earlier, which is religion.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that is really hard to argue against. And so the government of Qatar, and by the way, this is their rationale. It's not a lie. I mean, now they're very hypocritical about it. If you go to the ruling class, they're boozing it up in their houses. But put that aside, there is a religious prohibition against it. And so FIFA can't just go in there and go, we don't care about your religion, sell our beer. I mean, they can, but they shouldn't be surprised when somebody changed their mind.
Yeah, it's a tough. And just to illustrate your point, buried in the New York Times article, I found this quote, which really just sums everything up, and even beyond this story. The ban on alcohol consumption seems to apply only to fans attending the games. Beer and other drinks, including the official FIFA champagne and array of sommelier selected wines, will still be available in stadium luxury suites reserved for FIFA officials and other wealthy guests.
And that does not surprise me in the least.
Right. So that pretty much that sums this show up generally, but it shows you that where it matters, all those things get figured out.
Yeah, I mean, I have spent time in the Middle East, albeit I was living in a tent, but that sort of mindset was immediately abundantly apparent to me, which is, if you're in the royal family or the hoity-toity class there, none of these rules apply to you, and that's what this is.
Right. And when you're hosting people like that, you serve them. So
Yes.
the schmuck from fans from Mexico that flew all the way there,
We don't.
you're
Who cares
SOL.
about you?
Yeah. Anyway, so on to the continuing the more money, more problems.
That's the whole theme of the entire show. What are you talking about? It's not a theme of this episode.
You might have been watching or paying attention, or maybe not, to this sort of FTX, which is a crypto broker, which is going belly up, and more importantly, it's going belly up because it basically a Ponzi scheme, basically taking money from that they're supposed to be held for customers to pay off debts somewhere else, and
it's almost literally the Bernie Madoff scheme, just electronically.
Just with a hip crypto filter. So that's all happening. Now, the interesting part for us is you might remember FTX is pretty well. They wanted to bum rush the culture in many ways, and so sports is one of those ways. And so this is whenever we've talked about crypto type stories. We talked about athletes like Tom Brady, like Steph Curry. We talked about naming rights, like the FTX. Well, I think formerly known as the FTX Stadium, where the Miami Hurricanes play, the basketball arena in Miami. Miami is a hot spot for this kind of stuff, so it made total sense that they would get the naming rights there. The Major League Baseball umpires, I think, had FTX patches. So that money and that ad revenue and the personal reputation of a number of high marquee athletes is connected here.
Shohei Ohtani is another one. There are tons and tons of stories so you can get into detail about this scandal. What I am reading here is the sport, what Chris got a lot of this from is Sports Business Journal. Manfred talks FTX umpire patch not returning by Eric Bacharach, dated November 17, 2022. And basically Manfred's response to this was that Major League Baseball in and of itself has been very careful. They haven't invested anything, and we're really just talking about sponsorships here. And so he doesn't think. The money quote here, though, was, while he would not delve into specific details about how much of the loss MLB stands to absorb, Manfred noted the FTX deal was a meaningful deal for us. And so he's not just blowing it off, and he is losing money. And like you said, it was just a sponsorship thing here. And by the way, the basic gist of what this guy did, this Sam Bankman-Fried guy did, was take the money from the investors, transferred it over to a related entity run by his girlfriend, and then taking the money from that entity, investing it in things, and then taking the money and putting it back into FTX to prop it up. So, in other words, the value of the company was a bit of a house of cards. And then also, apparently, the terms of service expressly said they would not transfer the consumer money, to this other entity. So there's a breach of service, and there's your class action lawsuit, and then your fraud is, using consumer money to prop up the value, basically, like nuclear fission style. So that is the gist of what happened. And there's a bunch of political angles that I won't get into here. He was a major donor to the Democratic Party, and that's a whole nother show. So what is the impact on these people? Major League Baseball will survive. One way or the other, Major League Baseball will survive. What I would be more concerned about is the impact on some of these big-name athletes. Because Shohei Ohtani is apparently a defendant in the class action lawsuit.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's what the Sports Business Journal article said, that he is a defendant. And that, I mean, because this was, how much was this? $30 billion, I think was the amount.
Yeah.
That is a huge amount of money that nobody has. I mean, this money is just like evaporated. And so are we going to have a number of athletes, Shohei Ohtani and others, who are now going to have a huge judgment hanging over their heads? Possibly. So that's more interesting to me than, did baseball lose a sponsor?
Yeah, lots of people are losing money on this deal. I agree. I think, and what companies that have relationship with athletes or celebrities of any kind fail all the time, right? I mean, you could go back to the late '90s tech internet boom bust cycle, and where there was probably a pet.com stadium or whatever. Remember monster.com was buying ads in the Super Bowl. And but that's not what this is, right? That's the reputational damage to an Ohtani or Brady, and we go into Brady a little bit more here in a second, is that this was fraud, right? This wasn't just a company that went belly up or whose business model ran out of time.
Criminal fraud on a massive scale.
Right.
The largest scale in history, really.
Right. So now your reputation is linked to that, not just a failed business venture. Those happen daily. That's how the system is supposed to work. But this fraud is a much different thing. So you had Tom Brady literally on the ground at their big, and I think this is within the last year, crypto conference in the Bahamas, and basically a big party / conference that FTX ran. I mean, you had them doing video messages from from Tom Brady's like villa kitchen. This wasn't just where Brady and others, Ohtani, it wasn't just wearing a patch, right? It wasn't just taking some sponsorship money. No. When billionaires throw money around, and they look towards you, everyone has their pocketbook open. But the reputational damage here, and then we'll see what risk is actually even more legal, but it's going to be sizable. I remember this was Tom Brady. This was the big commercial with his now soon to be ex-wife that they, and we talked about. I remember we talked about how when you couldn't actually get to the website, because you couldn't actually, you couldn't actually use it. Yeah. How we laughed about like here's their giant ad for something you couldn't actually access in the US.
Yeah.
So that was them.
Yeah. From a legal perspective, I don't know how much at risk these people really are. I mean, unless they had individual knowledge and involvement in the scheme itself. Because at the end of the day, if you're a global ambassador, I think the Sports Business Journal article said Shohei Ohtani was a global ambassador, maybe. Let me look it up here again real fast. But, I mean, that ultimately is nothing more than a marketing thing, ultimately. And so the idea that these athletes, Brady, Ohtani, and all these guys are responsible for the goings-on of the company and the people are running it, I think is a bit far-fetched. And certainly, okay, so it says Angels pitcher Shohei Ohtani, global ambassador. So that was his title. He's not responsible for this, and neither is Brady. They aren't. And so I think class action lawyers tend to just throw crap against the wall and hope it sticks, mainly. And a lot of plaintiffs lawyers do this. And so you just sue everybody, and then you force Brady and Ohtani to kick in some money in a settlement. I mean, that's all they're there for. So I don't think ultimately that any of these athletes are really in any kind of criminal trouble unless they were somehow involved in the management of the company. So I think for the athletes, it may be a bit of a reputational hit, but frankly, Brady's taken a bunch of reputational hits anyway recently, and this is just another one. But I don't think it's going to be that big a deal for the athlete, ambassador, marketer, sponsor guys.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Unless we're somehow, we'll see. I mean, they certainly don't want their stuff.
Yeah, I mean, did they know about it? They might be plaintiffs actually.
Yeah, Yeah, right. Eventually, that's true. Mm-hmm. But it just it's so funny when you see these things come up so fast. No one makes tens of billions of dollars this fast. I mean, even if you look at someone like Bezos, right? I mean, you measure his getting to where he is now in decades, not years. So even stuff in the same sort of sphere, it's amazing. But when you're throwing around that much money, it's just everyone's listening.
Well, Elon Musk is the other one. I mean, He's a controversial figure now, but he built his fortune through a tangible product,
Yeah.
Tesla. And then the other part of it is SpaceX. I mean, there's a product behind it. Bezos and Amazon. It's a service and a product that, like you said, lost money for literally like what 15 years.
Yeah.
And he always had a vision of the future and all of that. And here, this Sam Bankman-Fried guy just creates $30 billion out of absolutely nothing almost overnight in relative terms. Um, I read a quote from Bezos this week in which he said, I guess he met with this Bankman-Fried guy, and the quote was, "He set off my BS meter immediately." And that means that Elon Musk, who's a smart guy, saw through this right away. And the other thing is, Sam Bankman-Fried does not act like a businessman. He doesn't act legit. He's wearing shorts and T-shirts to meetings with presidents.
Yeah. And I was listening. I can't remember. I read mainlining so much as he would be preferred to be called SBF, Steve. That all how manicured all that stuff was, right? He wasn't just some like on the spectrum nerd that just like all of that stuff. No, I'm not going to comb my hair. No, I'm not going to put slacks on. Because all of that was about the con, right? It was all planned, thoughtful, and intentional.
He did some interviews with people where he kind of disclosed this by accident. By the way, was it Politico? Don't quote me on Politico, but I think it was Political, but I might be wrong. But the reporter is texting with this guy, and SBF. I refuse to call him what he wants to be called. So Sam, Mr. Bankman-Fried, admitted it was a con. Where the reporter would say, basically, these regulations are asking for appear to just be benefiting you, and he basically said yes. And what I'm talking about here, by the way, is what he was doing was lobbying the federal government for regulation of the crypto industry, and what he was lobbying for was basically going to crush all of his competition and allow him to be kind of in the prime slot. And so it was a very cynical thing to do. Although, as we talked about off the air, Chris, you could have a whole debate about regulation of crypto, but that's another matter. But point is, he admitted the con. He really needed a better PR agent, in this.
He walked a nice edge because, like, pushing for more regulation, kind of even like a culture of radical transparency, all these things that like sound good and have certain almost like mystical charm in Silicon Valley. Speaking to kind of speaking to Silicon Valley ease to a degree. The part of the positioning was walking that knife's edge, right? That was a differentiator from him. Quite frankly, if you even like smell the crypto world a little bit, it's a weird, dark, gross world. That thrives on, for good and ill, anonymity. Kind of hard to find, right? Those are features, not a bug, as they would say.
Well, and you know a lot more about crypto than I do, but I think that's the entire point of it, is it not? And the anonymity.
Yeah, somewhat.
Yeah.
But if you're looking to differentiate yourself and make billions fast and get laws written in your favor, then the last thing you want to be is some weird dark web crypto nerd, edgelord type. So it was a smart but walking a knife's edge, as I said, way to differentiate himself. Which I think ultimately failed, but it didn't ultimately fail even because that PR technique was good or bad. You could probably make a case that it was actually smart. What you can make a case for is you can't move money between entities when you're supposed to be holding customer dollars. I mean, so it doesn't matter if you wear shorts or you have an Amani suit for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. You can't steal from your customers and that be okay.
The funny thing is that this all happened because he irritated his competitor. What's the name of the Chinese company?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to butcher
Okay,
it
there's a Chinese
Binex.
Yeah, that is run by a Chinese businessman who is larger than FTX. And Sam Bankman-Fried irritated this guy apparently, and so he had the company tweet out something about liquidating its assets in FTX, and that caused everybody to panic and sell out and try to pull their money out, and that's what caused this problem to happen. And so basically, Sam irritated his competitor, who then turned around and said, "Fine, I will ruin your company," and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, it caused a bank run basically by customers trying to pull their money out, which then the money goes when the money's not there, then that problem comes quick.
And that is what happened with Madoff. People
Yeah.
tried to withdraw the money, and it wasn't there because he'd stolen it all, basically. And
you can run that shell game if you're always paying out on your schedule but keeping your customers happy.
Right.
is essentially how that works. So as soon as something tips that balance, so you're having to pay out more than you can move behind the scenes, that's when the run happens.
Yeah, and that's what happened with Madoff. That's what happened with Bankman-Fried. Is the same exact thing. So here's the question: 2 questions. One, is Bankman-Fried going to go to prison, and how long? 2, how long is it going to be before the movie comes out? So I'm going to say Bankman-Fried's going to go to prison for life, I think, because the United States is trying to extradite him from, was it the Bahamas? Is that where he was?
Yeah.
So the Bahamian government's investigating him, but the United States wants to extradite him, and because the DOJ can do a way better job than the Bahamian government investigating all this stuff, and then the criminal justice system's much more concrete and all that. So I think eventually they're going to get him here, and he's going to go away for life. That's what I think. And in terms of the movie, I'm going to give it 2 years.
So I can't bet on this one because I actually have some knowledge, not inside knowledge, but
okay.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. So some of you probably know the writer Michael Lewis in a sports context. He was the guy who wrote Moneyball. He wrote Blindside.
Him on this show, I think.
Yeah, and he moved into sort of financial reporting from sports reporting. He has, get this, Steve, he has been embedded with SBF for the last 6 months.
Has he really? Oh my gosh.
So
the book is half written then.
Yes, and they were and the studios have lined, since that news broke a couple days ago. Basically, I think it was Lewis himself that came out and said,
"Do you know him?"
What?
No,
I don't know him. I mean, I've read his books, but I don't know him. That the studio negotiations to buy the rights of a book that's not even out yet, which isn't that strange ultimately, is already in place. So your 2 years just in terms, you've got to write the book, yada, yada, like just in terms of production time probably is right. But whatever the under is, I'd say take it. Because this guy, he's been there for 6 months. One of the Globe's preeminent journalists on financial famous. Big Short is him, et cetera, et cetera.
I didn't know that. That's good. See, this is the kind of information you get when you listen to It's Just Business. This sort of inside information. Didn't know. Yeah. So, I mean, Michael Lewis isn't just sitting there goofing off for 6 months. He's writing all the time. That's what these guys do. So he's already got most of this written. He just needs to add the end, basically. Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, it's I mean, it's a classic Hollywood story, is it not? Although, on the other hand, was there ever a Bernie Madoff movie? I don't know if there was.
There was, yeah. I think it was Robert De Niro that played him in a made-for-HBO.
Oh, you're right. No, that's
or Al
right.
Pacino, one of the two.
Yeah, you're right. I haven't seen it, but yeah, okay. So, anyways, that's going to happen. In prison term, what do you think?
I'd say, if you look, if the past is prologue, then Madoff died in prison. He was significantly older, obviously, but he got a sentence that was going to guarantee he died in prison.
Yeah, I didn't literally mean a life sentence, but he's going to get enough years that it's functional.
Oh yeah, I know what you meant. I'm just saying, Madoff wasn't going to whiff the fresh air again, even if he had been 35.
Because you could attach literally millions of individual fraud charges and stack them concurrently. Or consecutively rather. You could put this guy away for 300 years if you wanted to.
Right, even if they all carried a 5-year sentence.
That's right. I know. That's what I'm saying.
So yeah, no, I see no world in which he isn't. Remember the movie Bad Boys with Sean Penn about juvie hall?
No, I don't.
Okay, it's a great movie. It's very young Sean Penn, like Fast Times era, gets sent to juvenile hall, and he's like a tough, and it's just basically about him surviving in juvenile prison. But he befriends a white Afro nerd That
white afro nerd.
because SBF has a giant weird white afro.
Yeah.
They
He
even
looks
look
like
the
the
same.
reincarnation of Art Garfunkel.
Yeah, exactly. So Sean Penn befriends this smart nerd who keeps getting beat up, and then they kind of help each other like brains and brawn. And that'll be SBF. Although he'll be obviously minimum security, federal prison or whatever, country club style. But
he
he'll be there for
he
a
can't
long
afford
time.
to pay off anybody now, though. He didn't have any money.
Yeah.
He's not rich anymore.
No, he is not. And we laugh about this, and it is, of course, funny. And there's a lot of Schadenfreude and all that. But I mean,
well,
he
more
lost
importantly,
a lot
the
of people.
he ruined the lives of thousands of people. That is a tragedy, and that's why we laugh about it, like you said, but he needs to be thrown away, and you lock him up, throw away the key.
I just finished a novel that actually one of the main thrusts is a kind of like a Madoff character fallout, and the Madoff character is in prison, just like we're talking here, for life, and he's visited by the ghosts, like the person that committed suicide when their life savings was gone, like the old lady that whose life he ruined, and he's like visited in prison by the ghosts of these people whose lives, basically like were destroyed by the fallout. And the human factor is real.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is real, and he's got that on his conscience. Him and whoever these other people are that were all living in the group sex house in the Bahamas.
Yeah, it's just a Fry festival. Yeah,
It's like
there's
nerds
so many
on
examples.
parade down there. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But we need some. I've seen some funny jokes that said, if they made Revenge of the Nerds now, it'd actually be Revenge on the Nerds.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. They're not being picked on anymore.
No.
They're the ones doing the
shifted.
picking. Yeah.
Anyway, so this will probably give us a couple of other opportunities to talk about, and you'll probably hear Steph Curry and Ohtani and Tom Brady. They're not going to be talking about this anytime soon publicly.
Hashtag content.
There you go. All right, Steve. Well, you got a little bit of a season to talk about. At least it's not drudgery. How are you guys talking about it?
I'll tell you what I said on the Hogstye was this past week's game, Washington versus the Eagles, which is 2 weeks ago, for those of you listening to it, that was the first time in a long time that I found myself rooting for Washington again. Because it was a fun game to watch. Taylor Heineke, not a great quarterback, but he's just infectious, his attitude, and just fun game to watch. So we have we've got our once a week now Hogstye show, and Rick Snyder has his Seasons of Discontent show. We have all of our regular written content. We've got a lot of exciting things, so check it out.
All right. Left hand up. We'll see you in 2 weeks.